I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window as I sipped my tea. At 68, I'd grown to appreciate these quiet moments. My name is Laura Jackson, and 30 years ago, I never imagined I'd be where I am today. My simple 2-story home in the Boston suburbs isn't what most people would expect from someone in my position. The furniture is well-worn but comfortable. Family photos line the walls, and my prized possession is my late husband James's reading chair. James died in a car accident when our son Oliver was just 2 years old, leaving me with more than grief. A failed business venture had buried us in debt. I was a 38-year-old nurse with a toddler, no husband, and creditors calling day and night. Those first years were a blur of exhaustion. I worked triple shifts at Boston Memorial Hospital, coming home to relieve my elderly neighbor who watched Oliver. Every night after putting him to bed, I'd spread financial papers across the kitchen table, desperately trying to make the numbers work. The turning point came when I noticed how many of my elderly patients had no one visiting them. These weren't just patients. They were Eleanor, who taught piano for 50 years, Robert, who fought in Vietnam, Margaret, who raised 5 children alone. If I ever get old, Mrs. Abernathy told me one night as I adjusted her pillows, I hope I have someone like you caring for me, Laura. That comment planted a seed. I started taking night classes in business management, surviving on 3 hours of sleep and sheer determination. My first Golden Care facility was a converted Victorian home with just 8 residents. The bank laughed when I applied for a loan, a single mother nurse with massive debt. But Martha, my supervisor, believed in me, becoming my first investor. That first year nearly broke me. I'd work nursing shifts, rush to check on Golden Care, then come home to help Oliver with homework. There were nights I cried in the bathroom so Oliver wouldn't hear me. Then word spread about our facility, how we treated residents like family, how their dignity was our priority. Soon we had a waiting list, then investors, then offers to expand. Now, 30 years later, Golden Care operates 28 luxury senior living communities across New England. Our approach revolutionized elder care, emphasizing independence, dignity, and joy. Yet despite my success, I kept my lifestyle modest. My home remained the same one where I raised Oliver. I drove a reliable but ordinary car. My clothes were quality but not designer. What's the point of a mansion when you sleep in one bed? I'd tell Oliver when he suggested I upgrade. I'd rather put that money toward making our residents' lives better. Oliver grew up watching me work tirelessly, learning the value of hard work and compassion. He became a pediatrician, another healer, though for the youngest patients instead of the oldest, until Isabella Green came into our lives. The first time Oliver mentioned her, I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard before. She works in PR for North Star Pharmaceuticals. You should see how she commands a room. When they finally came for dinner, Isabella was everything Oliver described. Beautiful, polished, confident. She complimented my home in a way that sounded rehearsed, her eyes scanning everything as if calculating its value. Such a charming little place, she said, emphasizing little, just enough. Throughout dinner, Isabella spoke about brand names, exclusive restaurants, and her recent trip to Paris. When Oliver mentioned I owned a business, her interest briefly flickered. What kind of business? She asked, suddenly attentive. Senior care, I said simply, not elaborating that Golden Care was the largest privately owned senior living corporation in the Northeast. Oh, she replied, interest immediately fading. That must be rewarding. After they left, I thought about how different Isabella was from the women Oliver had dated before. She was ambitious, certainly, but there was something beneath her polished exterior, a hunger I recognized from my own difficult years, a fear of not having enough. I decided to reserve judgment. After all, everyone has their own story. Who was I to assume the worst? Little did I know how much that decision would be tested in the months to come. The spring rain tapped against my kitchen window as I prepared Oliver's favorite apple pie. He was bringing Isabella for dinner again, and despite our awkward first meeting, I was determined to make an effort. Throughout dinner, I observed the dynamic between them. Oliver, usually confident, seemed to defer to Isabella on almost everything. He checked her reaction before sharing an opinion, and twice stopped himself mid-sentence when she gave him a certain look. This wasn't the son I raised. Isabella dominated the conversation, speaking about exclusive events and name-dropping with practiced ease. When she mentioned her parents, Richard and Victoria Green, her voice took on a reverent quality. "Daddy's family has been in finance for generations," she explained. "They taught me that presentation is everything." "And do you agree with that assessment?" I asked. "Of course. First impressions are everything in my world." "And what world is that?" I asked gently. "The real world," she replied with a condescending smile, "where connections and appearances determine success." After dinner, when Isabella stepped outside to take a call, Oliver immediately leaned forward. "What do you think?" he asked, eyes eager for approval. I chose honesty, tempered with kindness. "She's certainly accomplished. But Oliver, do you feel like yourself when you're with her?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Oliver I know has always valued substance over style. The man I saw tonight seemed very concerned with Isabella's approval." He sat back, defensive. "You don't know her like I do. Mom," the conversation ended when Isabella returned, but I saw the seed of doubt I'd planted in Oliver's eyes. The next time I saw Oliver, he announced, "We're engaged," showing me a photograph of a diamond ring that could have paid for an entire wing of my first care facility. Over the following weeks, wedding plans accelerated at a pace that left me breathless. Isabella had apparently been planning her dream wedding long before Oliver proposed. Every detail was already decided: a 5-star hotel, hundreds of guests, custom everything. The first real conflict came when Isabella and I met for lunch. She slid a leather-bound planner across the table containing a detailed budget with my contribution already calculated, a 6-figure sum. "Isabella, I'd be happy to host the rehearsal dinner, but I think we should discuss the budget with Oliver present." Something flashed in her eyes, annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. "I just assumed with your situation, you'd want time to prepare financially." My situation, the words hung between us. Her assumption about my finances so clear, it was almost amusing. That evening, I called my attorney. 2 days later, I signed the papers transferring ownership of a waterfront property in Boston's most exclusive neighborhood, a $4 million home I'd purchased as an investment years ago, along with 30% of Golden Care shares, to be given to Oliver and Isabella as a wedding gift. As the wedding approached, I made another decision. Despite Isabella's suggestions about appropriate attire, I chose to wear my vintage Chanel suit that James had given me for our 10th anniversary. "Mom," Oliver said when I showed him my choice, "it's beautiful." But Isabella was thinking something more. Current. "Oliver, I've worn this on every important day of my life since your father gave it to me. I'm not going to stop now." But Isabella was not easily persuaded. At our final meeting before the wedding, she looked at my suit with poorly disguised horror, showing me photographs of mother-of-the-groom dresses, all sequins and bright colors. "I'm just concerned you'll feel out of place," she said. "People will be watching," I smiled, gathering my purse to leave. "Then they'll see a woman who values meaning over show. I'm comfortable with that." Still, something bothered me enough that I made one more call that night, to a discreet private investigator I'd used for corporate background checks. Something about Isabella's stories didn't quite add up. "Just a basic background check," I told the investigator. "Family, education, employment, nothing invasive." What I didn't know then was how crucial that decision would prove to be. The first time I met the Greens was at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston, 2 months before the wedding. Richard and Victoria Green arrived 15 minutes late, making an entrance that turned heads. Richard wore a tailored suit with an ostentatious gold watch. Victoria, blonde and surgically preserved, dripped with jewelry. Throughout dinner, the Greens dominated conversation with stories about country clubs, vacations in exclusive locations, and friends in high places. Each anecdote seemed carefully crafted to establish their social standing. "And where did you grow up, Isabella?" I asked during a lull in conversation. A moment of tension flickered across the table. Victoria answered before Isabella could open her mouth. "Westchester County. Of course. The Green estate has been in Richard's family for generations. Isabella nodded, but I noticed she suddenly became very interested in her dessert. The next morning, I received a call from my private investigator. "Mrs. Jackson, I have some preliminary findings you might want to hear in person." We met at a quiet cafe. "The Greens aren't who they claim to be," he said without preamble. "Richard and Victoria Green from Westchester don't exist, at least not the ones connected to Isabella." I opened the folder to find documents showing that Richard and Victoria Barrett were small-time actors who mostly worked as extras. They've been hired to play Isabella's parents at multiple events over the past few years. Davis explained. "There's a paper trail of payments from Isabella to both of them." My hand trembled slightly as I turned the page to find Isabella's real background. Isabella Collins had grown up in a housing project in South Philadelphia, the daughter of a factory worker named Frank Collins and a waitress who'd abandoned the family when Isabella was 12. She changed her name legally 5 years ago, Davis continued. Worked her way through community college, then transferred to Penn State on scholarship, created an entirely new identity for herself. I sat back, processing this information. Isabella hadn't just been hiding her background, she'd constructed an elaborate fiction, complete with paid actors. "There's more," Davis said. "She's deeply in debt. Designer clothes, luxury apartment, expensive car, all financed beyond her means." I couldn't condemn Isabella for wanting to escape poverty. Hadn't I worked tirelessly to provide Oliver with opportunities I never had? But the deception, the paid actors, the elaborate lies. What did that say about her character, and did Oliver know that weekend? I approached the subject carefully. "Oliver, how much do you know about Isabella's background?" He shrugged. "The usual stuff. Grew up in Westchester, attended private schools, her father's in finance." So he didn't know. My heart sank. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, suddenly defensive. "You've never liked her." "That's not true," I said gently. "I barely know her, and it seems you might not know her as well as you think either." Oliver threw down his gardening gloves. "This is ridiculous. I'm marrying Isabella in 6 weeks. I thought you'd be happy for me." Oliver left shortly after, angry and confused. I sat alone in the garden, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Was I projecting my own values onto my son? Was I being unfair to Isabella? Perhaps her reinvention came from shame and fear, not manipulation. I decided to give Isabella one more chance, to see if there was authenticity beneath the carefully constructed facade. I would keep the information to myself for now, but watch carefully as the wedding approached. 5 weeks before the wedding, Isabella invited me to the final dress fitting at an exclusive bridal salon. The champagne flowed freely as Victoria and 3 of Isabella's bridesmaids cooed over the custom gown. "It's Vera Wang," Isabella announced proudly, twirling before the mirrors. "One of a kind." I smiled and nodded, wondering if Frank Collins would recognize his daughter in this elaborately beaded creation. According to my investigator's report, Isabella hadn't spoken to her father in 8 years. "Laura," Isabella said, interrupting my thoughts, "we need to discuss your outfit again." I sighed inwardly. "Isabella, as I mentioned, I'll be wearing my Chanel suit." Victoria exchanged a meaningful look with Isabella. "Dear, the wedding has a very specific aesthetic. Your vintage piece might feel out of place." Isabella handed me a photograph of an elaborate teal dress with sequins and feathers. "The designer can rush it for a modest fee, only $7,000. I nearly choked on my champagne. "That's very generous, but unnecessary. My suit is perfectly appropriate for a formal wedding." Isabella's smile tightened. "Laura, I'm not sure you understand. This wedding will be covered by Boston Elite magazine. Every detail matters." "Including me?" I asked mildly. "Well," Isabella finally said, her voice cooler, "I suppose we can seat you somewhere less central." And there it was, the threat, barely veiled. Conform or be marginalized. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received another call from my investigator. "Mrs. Jackson, something's come up. Frank Collins, Isabella's father, has been trying to contact her. He's coming to Boston for the wedding." My heart sank. "Does she know?" "No. He's been calling the North Star office, but she's blocked his number. He found out about the wedding from a cousin who saw the announcement in the paper." I made a quick decision. Give him my number. Tell him I'd like to help." The next day, Frank Collins called. His voice was rough but gentle, with a thick Philadelphia accent. "She's my little girl, only child. Her mother left when she was 12, and I raised her best I could. Factory work doesn't pay much, but Izzy was smart, scholarships, worked her way up. I'm real proud of her. She's ashamed of where she comes from," he continued. "Always wanted more. Can't blame her for that. But cutting me out entirely." His voice cracked. That hurt. My heart ached for this man. "Mr. Collins, I'd like to help. The wedding is at the Ritz-Carlton next Saturday. I can arrange a room for you there the night before." After some persuasion, he agreed. I made the reservation under my name to avoid alerting Isabella and arranged to meet him for breakfast the morning of the wedding. The night before the wedding, Oliver surprised me with a visit. He looked exhausted. "Mom, do you think I'm doing the right thing?" The question hung between us. I chose my words carefully. "Only you can answer that. Oliver, marriage should be built on truth, respect, and shared values. Do you feel those things with Isabella?" He stared into his cup. "I love her, but sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part in someone else's play." I reached across the table and took his hand. "It's not too late to pause and reflect. You know, a postponement isn't a cancellation." He shook his head. "Everything's arranged. Hundreds of guests are arriving. I can't back out now." When he left, he hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom, no matter what happens tomorrow." That night, I carefully laid out my Chanel suit, wondering how Isabella would react when she saw her real father at the wedding. Would she embrace her true identity, or would the carefully constructed facade finally shatter completely? Either way, tomorrow promised to be anything but ordinary. The morning of Oliver's wedding dawned clear and bright. I met Frank Collins for breakfast in the Ritz-Carlton's quiet restaurant. He looked out of place in his carefully pressed suit that had seen better days. Over coffee, Frank shared stories about Isabella's childhood, her determination in school, how she'd won a citywide science fair with a project on water purification, her graduation speech as valedictorian. When did she start? I searched for a delicate way to phrase it. Reinventing herself, Frank supplied with a sad smile. College. She came home that first Christmas with a new accent, new clothes, said she was tired of being that poor girl from the projects. By her junior year, she wouldn't bring friends home. By graduation, she had changed her name and told me it would be better if I didn't attend the ceremony. He pulled out a faded photograph of a teenage Isabella, or Izzy, as she was then, smiling broadly beside her father outside their modest apartment building. "This is the last picture we took together. She was 17. My heart ached for him." "What do you hope happens today?" Frank tucked the photo away carefully. "Just to see her. Maybe talk to her for a minute. Tell her I'm proud of her, no matter what." In my hotel room, I dressed carefully in my treasured Chanel suit. From my purse, I took a small velvet box containing my wedding gift, a pair of antique sapphire earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, along with the property deed and Golden Care share certificates. At the reception desk, I was about to ask for Isabella when I heard her voice behind me. "Laura, there you are." I turned to find Isabella approaching with a group of elegantly dressed guests. Her eyes widened slightly at my outfit, not with admiration, but dismay. "You decided to wear the suit after all," she said, her smile tightening. "Yes," I replied simply. "It's special to me." Isabella's gaze darted to the important-looking couple beside her. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, this is Oliver's." She paused, her expression calculating. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she finished. "This is the family's housekeeper, who's been with them for years. Practically raised Oliver." The breath froze in my lungs. Had she really just introduced me as the help Mrs. Harrington, dripping in diamonds, gave me a condescending smile. "How lovely that Oliver included you in his special day. Good help is so hard to find these days." I stood speechless as Isabella smoothly steered the couple away, throwing back over her shoulder. "The family section is up front, but I'm sure you'll be more comfortable in the back with the staff." My cheeks burned with humiliation and shock. In 40 years of business, I had never been so blatantly disrespected. A young event coordinator approached me hesitantly. "Ma'am, are you with the wedding?" I nodded, finding my voice. "I'm Laura Jackson, the groom's mother." Her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was told you were—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "The housekeeper," I supplied. To my surprise, she led me not to the front where family would normally sit, but to a table at the very back of the reception hall, tucked behind a large floral arrangement. My place card read simply L. Jackson, not even Mrs. or mother of the groom. An older gentleman in an impeccable suit approached my table. "Pardon me, but aren't you Laura Jackson of Golden Care?" I looked up in surprise. "Yes, I am." He extended his hand. "Harry Winters. I was chairman of North Star Pharmaceuticals until my retirement last year. I believe your son is marrying one of our PR specialists." "That's right," I confirmed, shaking his hand. "Isabella Green." Something flickered in his eyes. "Green? I thought her name was Collins." My heart skipped a beat. "You knew her as Collins." He nodded slowly. "Bright young woman. Started in our Philadelphia office about 6 years ago. Hard worker. Ambitious." He glanced around the lavish ballroom. "Very ambitious, apparently." From my isolated position, I watched Oliver arrive with his groomsmen, handsome in his tuxedo but visibly nervous. He scanned the room, presumably looking for me, but was quickly surrounded by Isabella's colleagues, across the ballroom, near the entrance. A commotion caught my attention. Frank Collins stood in the doorway, being blocked by a security guard. His face was pleading as he tried to explain himself. I rose to intervene when Isabella emerged from the bridal suite for some photographs. She froze when she saw Frank, her face draining of color. She gestured sharply to the security guard, who began firmly escorting Frank toward the exit. Without thinking, I hurried across the room. "Wait," I called as I approached. "He's with me." The security guard hesitated, looking between us in confusion. "Mrs. Jackson," Frank said, relief evident in his voice. I turned to the guard. "There's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Collins is my guest." Isabella had disappeared back into the bridal suite, but I could feel eyes on us from all directions. The security guard finally nodded and released Frank's arm. "Did she see me?" Frank asked. "Yes," I admitted. "She did." His face fell. "And she had me removed." "She's scared. Frank, she's built this entire identity, and she's afraid of it crumbling." As guests were being seated for the ceremony, Isabella made her grand entrance into the pre-ceremony reception area. Victoria hovered at her side like a proud stage mother, accepting compliments as if she had created Isabella herself. I remained at my isolated table with Frank, watching the spectacle unfold. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced charm, but her eyes darted nervously in our direction every few minutes. A group of elegant guests approached Isabella near our table. I recognized one as the CEO of a major Boston financial firm. Mrs. Blackwell glanced in my direction. "And who are these people, family friends?" Isabella leaned in, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Actually, that's the family's longtime housekeeper. Practically raised Oliver, so he insisted she come. And I believe that's her husband." Frank stiffened beside me. I placed a calming hand on his arm. Mrs. Blackwell nodded with exaggerated understanding. "How sweet of you to include the help, though she's dressed rather formally, isn't she? Almost like family." Isabella's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Well, you know how it is. Some people don't understand boundaries. But what can you do? Oliver's attached to her." The group moved on, but Isabella's words hung in the air between us. Frank's face had gone pale. "She called you the housekeeper," he whispered. "And me, it doesn't matter," I said, though the humiliation burned in my chest. Let her play her games, but it did matter. Throughout the next hour, I noticed whispers and glances in our direction. A waiter approached with champagne for all the surrounding tables but skipped ours entirely. When I requested a glass, he looked surprised. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was told the staff table would be served non-alcoholic beverages only." Eleanor Wilson, a doctor I'd known for 30 years, spotted me from across the room and made her way over. Laura Jackson, I almost didn't see you hidden back here. What on earth are you doing at the staff table? I forced a smile. Apparently there was a mix-up with the seating arrangements. Eleanor frowned. A mix-up you're the groom's mother. According to the bride, I'm the family housekeeper, I said quietly. As the bridal party began their procession, I made a decision. Taking Frank's arm, I whispered, "Follow me." We slipped along the outer edge of the seating area and made our way to the front row on the groom's side, where the mother of the groom traditionally sat. Several guests looked surprised as we took our places, but no one objected. Oliver, spotting me at last, broke into a relieved smile. I nodded encouragingly, my heart swelling with love for my son. As Isabella glided down the aisle on Richard's arm, her eyes locked with mine in the front row. Shock, then fury flashed across her face, momentarily cracking her perfect bridal mask. Then her gaze shifted to Frank beside me, and all color drained from her face. For a heartbeat, Isabella faltered, her step hitching. Richard steadied her with a practiced smile, but I could see panic rising in her eyes. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her, and 300 of Boston's elite were watching. The transition from cocktail hour to the main reception revealed Isabella's next strategic move. As guests consulted the elaborate seating chart, I discovered that despite claiming my rightful place during the ceremony, I had been relegated once again to obscurity for the reception. My assigned table was tucked behind a massive floral arrangement, almost completely hidden from the main floor. Table 27, the farthest possible location from the bridal party's table. To add insult to injury, I had been seated with the wedding vendors, the photographer's assistant, the videographer's intern, and the wedding planner's staff. Frank's name didn't appear on the seating chart at all. Eleanor found me examining the chart, her face flushed with indignation. "This is outrageous, Laura. You're the groom's mother." I shrugged with a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "It's fine, Eleanor." "It is most certainly not fine," she insisted. "I'm going to speak to Oliver." "Please don't," I said, touching her arm. "He has enough to deal with right now." As the reception began and guests found their tables, I led Frank to my assigned corner. The vendors looked surprised to see us joining them. "Are you at the wedding party?" the young photographer's assistant asked. "I'm the groom's mother," I replied simply. Her eyes widened. "But why are you seated back here with us?" I smiled. "It's complicated." From our hidden corner, Frank and I ate quietly while the vendors chatted among themselves, occasionally casting curious glances our way. "She's ashamed of me," Frank said softly, pushing his roasted duck around his plate. "Always has been. I'm just a factory worker with calloused hands and a high school education. Not good enough for her new life." "It's not about you, Frank," I replied. "It's about her. She's created this elaborate fiction because she's ashamed of herself. Not you." As dessert was being served, I noticed Oliver making his way through the crowd, clearly searching for someone. Me, I realized with a pang. He couldn't find his own mother at his wedding reception. When he finally spotted our table, hidden behind the floral arrangement, his face darkened with anger. He started toward us, only to be intercepted by Victoria, who placed a restraining hand on his arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. Eleanor appeared at our table, slipping into an empty chair beside me. "Laura, this has gone far enough. Half the guests are talking about how strange it is that you're hidden back here. And who is that woman Oliver was speaking with earlier?" "Isabella's aunt," Frank supplied. "Her real aunt." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Real aunt as opposed to?" I sighed. The truth was emerging whether Isabella wanted it or not. "Eleanor, the people Isabella introduced as her parents are actors she hired. Her real name is Isabella Collins, and this is her father, Frank Collins." Oliver broke away from Victoria and resumed his path toward our table. "Mom," he said, his voice tight with anger as he reached us. "What the hell is going on? Why are you sitting back here?" "Ask your wife," I replied gently. His eyes shifted to Frank. "And who is this?" Frank stood and extended his hand. "Frank Collins, sir, Isabella's father." Oliver's face went blank with shock. "Isabella's? But her father is Richard Green," Frank shook his head sadly. No, son. Richard is an actor. I'm Izzy's real father. Oliver sank into a chair, his world visibly tilting on its axis. An actor? What are you talking about? Quickly, compassionately. I explained what my investigator had discovered, Isabella's real background, the hired parents, the carefully constructed fiction of the Green family. Oliver listened in stunned silence, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and hurt. Why wouldn't she tell me? He finally whispered. I wouldn't have cared where she came from. She was afraid, Frank said quietly. Afraid you wouldn't want her if you knew she grew up in the projects with a factory worker for a father. Oliver stood abruptly. I need to talk to Isabella. Now. As he strode away, Isabella, seeing Oliver's expression as he approached, rose from her seat with alarm. Marie Collins, having apparently worked up her courage, was making her way toward the bridal table with her small gift in hand, and Victoria, watching both approaches with panic, was frantically signaling to Richard. As the emotional moment between Isabella and her father subsided, an awkward silence descended over the reception. The carefully planned schedule of toasts, dances, and cake cutting now seemed trivial in the wake of such raw emotion. The wedding planner, desperate to regain control of the situation, hurried forward with a fixed smile. Perhaps this would be a good time for the father-daughter dance, she suggested, then faltered as she realized the implications of her words. Which father, the actor who had left, or the real one who had just been revealed? It was Marie who broke the tension, stepping forward to take Isabella's hand. Izzy, honey, why don't you and your daddy have your dance? It's been a long time coming. The string quartet began playing What a Wonderful World, the song Isabella had selected for her dance with Richard. But now it was Frank who led his daughter to the center of the floor, his work-worn hands gentle as he assumed a formal dance position he clearly wasn't accustomed to. I don't really know how to do this fancy dancing, he admitted, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Isabella, or Izzy, as she now seemed to be, gave him a watery smile. Just sway, Dad. That's all we need to do. And so they did, moving slowly in a small circle while 300 of Boston's elite watched in fascinated silence. It was awkward, unpracticed, nothing like the choreographed performance that had been planned with Richard. But it was real, a father who had worked factory shifts to put his daughter through college, dancing with her at her wedding. I watched Oliver's face as he observed them. The initial shock and anger had given way to something more contemplative. He was seeing his wife anew, not as the polished socialite who had pursued him, but as a woman with depths and complexities he hadn't imagined. As the song ended, Frank kissed his daughter's cheek and led her back to where Oliver and I stood. I believe it's time for the groom to dance with his mother, Frank said with simple dignity, nodding toward me. Oliver hesitated, then extended his hand. Mom, may I have this dance? You knew, he said quietly as we began to dance. About Isabella. About the fake parents. All of it. I nodded. I suspected something wasn't right. The investigator confirmed it. Why didn't you stop the wedding? I looked into his eyes, so like his father's, honest and direct. It wasn't my place to make that decision for you, and I believe people deserve second chances. Oliver, Isabella, or Izzy made terrible choices in how she presented herself to you, but consider why she felt she needed to. He frowned. She could have trusted me with the truth. Could she? I asked gently. In a world where people are judged by their pedigree, their connections, their family background, where she'd already learned that doors opened for Isabella Green that remained closed to Izzy Collins. I'm not excusing her deception, I continued, but I understand it. 30 years ago, I was a single mother with mounting debt, trying to start a business in an industry dominated by men with Ivy League degrees and family connections. I never lied about who I was, but I certainly understood the temptation. When Oliver took the microphone, the room fell silent, everyone acutely aware that this was no ordinary wedding speech. I stand before you as a man who just discovered his wife isn't exactly who she claimed to be. Oliver looked directly at Isabella as he spoke. Her name wasn't Green, but Collins. Her parents weren't Richard and Victoria, but Frank, a factory worker from Philadelphia who sacrificed everything to give his daughter opportunities he never had. He paused, looking around the room. Many of you were invited to this wedding because of who you are, your social standing, your connections, your influence. I wonder how many of you would have RSVP'd yes if the invitation had come from Izzy Collins, daughter of a factory worker, instead of Isabella Green, daughter of a finance executive. I have a confession to make as well, Oliver said, turning toward me. I knew my mother was successful. I knew Golden Care was profitable. But I've allowed Isabella to believe my mother was of modest means, perhaps because I wanted to be loved for myself, not my family's money. This revelation landed like a stone in still water. Isabella's eyes widened as she looked at me with new understanding. The truth, Oliver concluded, is that we're all more complex than we appear. We all have parts of ourselves we hide, stories we don't tell, fears that drive us to present particular versions of ourselves to the world. He turned back to Isabella, taking her hand. I married you today, not Isabella Green with her fictitious pedigree, but the real woman beneath the facade, whoever she truly is. I look forward to getting to know her, if she's brave enough to let me. As Victoria's dramatic exit left the reception in stunned silence, the wedding planner made a desperate attempt to salvage the event. Perhaps this would be a good time for the cake cutting, she announced with forced brightness. The suggestion was so incongruously normal after the revelations that had just shaken the room that a ripple of nervous laughter spread through the guests. The tension fractured, if not quite broke. Isabella and Oliver exchanged a look, half bewildered, half resigned. Why not? Oliver said quietly. We might as well complete the traditional wedding checklist. Around the room, guests began to whisper among themselves, processing the revelations. Did you know Laura Jackson was that Laura Jackson? I had no idea the bride was from South Philadelphia. Were those people really con artists, not her parents at all? Frank and Marie had found seats together, the genuine family members finally united after years of separation. Harry Winters approached their table, introducing himself to Frank with surprising warmth. Your daughter is one of the most talented young professionals I worked with at North Star, I overheard him say. Now I understand where she got her work ethic. Eleanor appeared at my elbow as I watched the scene unfold. Well, she said dryly, this is certainly the most memorable wedding I've ever attended. You knew about Isabella's background, Eleanor observed. That's why you hired the investigator, I nodded. Something felt off from the beginning. I wanted to understand who Oliver was really marrying. And you never told him what you discovered. I was hoping she would tell him herself. I said, everyone deserves the chance to share their own story. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. And your wealth. You let her believe you were of modest means. I never lied about who I was, I clarified. I simply didn't correct her assumptions. Golden Care isn't a secret. Anyone who bothered to research me would have discovered the truth. But you knew she hadn't, Eleanor pointed out. You let her treat you like the help, I sighed. Perhaps that was wrong of me. But I wanted to see her true character, how she would treat someone she thought couldn't benefit her socially or financially. I noticed Isabella breaking away from the photo session, making her way toward the restrooms with a determined stride. Her face was composed, but I recognized the set of her shoulders, the rigid control of someone barely holding themselves together. Excuse me, I said, rising from my table. There's something I need to do. I followed Isabella to the ladies' room, finding her alone inside, gripping the marble countertop as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her elaborate makeup was streaked with tears, her carefully constructed image literally crumbling before her eyes. She stiffened when she saw me enter, wariness replacing vulnerability. Come to gloat, she asked, her voice brittle. No, I said simply. I came to see if you're all right. She laughed, a hollow sound. All right, my entire life just collapsed in front of 300 people. My husband discovered I've been lying about everything, and it turns out his mother, who I treated like the help, is one of the wealthiest women in Boston. She shook her head. No, Laura, I'm not all right. I moved to stand beside her at the mirror. For what it's worth, I understand why you did it. Her eyes met mine in the reflection. Suspicious. Do you? More than you might think. 30 years ago, I was a widow with a toddler and a mountain of debt. I worked triple shifts as a nurse while trying to start Golden Care. The bankers who turned down my loan applications didn't see a future business leader. They saw a desperate single mother they couldn't wait to escort out of their offices. Isabella listened, her defenses lowering slightly. The difference, I continued, is that I didn't try to become someone else. I forced them to see me, really see me, and what I was capable of. That's easy to say from where you are now, Isabella said bitterly. You're right, I acknowledged. I don't know what it's like to grow up in the projects, but I do know what it's like to be underestimated, to be dismissed because of circumstances beyond your control. Isabella turned to face me directly. Why are you being kind to me after how I treated you? Because I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age, I said honestly. Determination, resilience, the drive to create something better than what you were given. I hired fake parents, she said flatly. I lied to everyone, including Oliver. I treated you like a servant. Yes, I agreed. Those were terrible choices, but they came from a place of fear, not malice, fear of being rejected for who you really are. Isabella's composure cracked, fresh tears welling in her eyes. What am I supposed to do now? My career is probably over. My marriage might be over before it's even begun. I can't go back to being Izzy Collins. But Isabella Green never really existed. I reached out cautiously, placing a hand on her arm. Perhaps it's time to find out who you really are. Not Izzy from the projects or Isabella with the fabricated pedigree, but the woman beneath all the masks. By the time Isabella and I returned to the reception, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Many guests had already departed, sensing that the celebration had effectively ended with Victoria's dramatic revelations. Isabella hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. Actually, I'd like to say a few words first. As Isabella took the microphone, a hush fell over the remaining guests. Oliver turned to watch her, his expression guarded but attentive. Thank you all for staying, Isabella began, her voice steady despite the emotion of the past hour. I know this hasn't been the wedding reception any of us expected. I owe everyone in this room an apology, but especially my husband. She looked directly at Oliver. I've spent years constructing an identity I thought would make me acceptable to people like you. People who never had to worry about whether there would be food on the table or if the electricity would be shut off. She paused, visibly gathering courage. My name is Isabella Collins. I legally changed it from Izzy Collins 5 years ago. I grew up in South Philadelphia with my father, Frank Collins. He worked at a steel factory for 30 years to give me opportunities he never had, and I repaid him by being ashamed of where I came from. The people I introduced as my parents, Richard and Victoria Green, were actors I hired to play a role, an elaborate, expensive deception that spiraled out of control. I did it because I was afraid that if people knew the truth about me, about where I came from, doors would close, opportunities would vanish. She turned to Oliver, who stood motionless, watching her. I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't know if our marriage can survive beginning with such a fundamental deception, but I want you to know that beneath all the lies about my background, my feelings for you were real. Her voice caught. Are real. Then the MC cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, the mother of the groom would like to say a few words. All eyes turned to me as I made my way to the microphone. I hadn't planned to speak again, but Isabella's courage had moved me. Perhaps it was time to lay all the cards on the table. Like Isabella, I want to acknowledge some truths that have been obscured today. My name is Laura Jackson. I'm Oliver's mother, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Golden Care Senior Living Communities. I looked directly at Isabella. While Isabella was constructing a fiction about having more than she did, my son was hiding the extent of our family's resources, not out of shame, but out of a desire to be loved for himself, rather than his potential inheritance. We all present versions of ourselves to the world. I continued. Some of us hide our successes, some hide our struggles, But authentic connection can only happen when we're brave enough to be seen for who we truly are. I held up the documents. This is the deed to a waterfront property in Back Bay, a historic brownstone overlooking the harbor that I purchased as an investment several years ago. It's valued at approximately $4 million. Along with it, I'm transferring 30% of Golden Care shares to the two of you, representing a significant portion of the company I've built over the past 30 years. Oliver's eyes widened in shock. Isabella stood frozen, her lips parted in disbelief. This gift comes with no strings attached, I continued. But it does come with a hope that you'll build a life together based on honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that true worth comes from character, not credentials or connections. There's one more thing I'd like to say. I surveyed the remaining guests. Look around this room. How many of you come from humble beginnings? How many had parents or grandparents who worked in factories, or cleaned houses, or drove taxis? How many of you have parts of your history you've polished or obscured to fit into certain circles? Isabella's mistake wasn't coming from South Philadelphia or having a factory worker for a father. Her mistake was believing those facts made her less worthy of acceptance. And perhaps our mistake, as a society, is creating a world where that belief could take root. The band began playing as Oliver approached Isabella, stopping just short of taking her in his arms. For a tense moment, they stood facing each other, two people who had married as relative strangers, their carefully constructed personas now stripped away. "I don't know who you are," Oliver said, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Isabella nodded, tears threatening again. "I know. I'm not sure I know anymore either. But I'd like the chance to find out, and to show you, if you'll let me." Oliver was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "I think we both have some discovering to do." The morning after the wedding dawned with a crystalline clarity that belied the emotional turbulence of the previous day. I stood at my kitchen window, watching early light filter through the maple trees James had planted decades ago, wondering how Oliver and Isabella had weathered their first night as husband and wife, two people who had essentially married strangers. My phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. "The entire Back Bay is buzzing. 3 versions of what happened are circulating. How are you holding up? Have you heard from them?" I hadn't. Part of me yearned to reach out, to check on Oliver and offer support, but deeper wisdom prevailed. They needed space to find their own path forward. Sometimes the most profound parenting happens in silence, in the moments when we resist the urge to intervene. The doorbell rang just as I was pouring my first cup of tea. When I opened the door, Frank Collins stood on my porch, still wearing the rumpled suit from yesterday, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and determination. "Mrs. Jackson," he twisted his weathered hands together. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I don't have anyone else to talk to about all this. Please, come in, Frank, and it's Laura." I ushered him into my kitchen, where the familiar ritual of preparing tea gave us both something to focus on besides the awkwardness. "I was just about to have breakfast. Will you join me?" He sank into a chair at my kitchen table, the same table where Oliver and I had shared countless conversations throughout his childhood. "I couldn't sleep at the hotel," he admitted, staring into the steaming mug I placed before him. Kept replaying yesterday in my mind. The look on Izzy's face when she saw me like I was her worst nightmare come to life. "That wasn't about you," I said gently. "That was about the facade crumbling. Maybe?" He traced the wood grain of my table with a calloused finger. "I keep asking myself where I went wrong. What made her so ashamed of me that she needed to invent an entirely new family?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over his, feeling the ridges and valleys of decades of manual labor. "Frank, I raised a child alone too. We make mistakes, certainly. But Isabella's choices weren't about your failings. They were about a world that taught her she needed to be someone else to belong. But why go to such extremes?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Hiring actors, changing her name, cutting me out completely." "Fear is a powerful motivator," I replied. "And the fear of rejection can drive people to extraordinary lengths. Think about how many doors must have closed in her face before she decided she needed to break in through a window." Frank was silent for a long moment. I just want my daughter back, he finally whispered. Even if she's different now. Even if she's Isabella instead of my Isabel. As we sat together, two parents united in concern for their children. My phone rang. Oliver's name appeared on the screen, sending a flutter of anxiety through my chest. "Mom," he said, his voice strained but steady. "Isabella and I would like to come over. There are some things we need to discuss. Is now a good time?" "Of course," I replied, striving for neutrality. "Actually, Frank Collins is here." A pause hung heavy on the line. "That's probably for the best. We should all talk together." 45 minutes later, Oliver's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched them sit motionless for a moment before emerging. They moved in unison but maintained a careful distance, connected yet separate, like planets in adjacent orbits. When I opened the door, I barely recognized Isabella. Gone was the immaculate socialite with the designer dress and flawless makeup. In her place stood a woman in simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face scrubbed clean. Without the armor of artifice, she looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more authentic than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes immediately sought her father, who had risen from his chair at their arrival. For an excruciating moment, they simply stared at each other across my living room, the factory worker who had sacrificed everything for his daughter, and the woman who had spent years pretending he didn't exist. "Dad?" she finally said, the word emerging as barely more than a whisper. Frank opened his arms without hesitation, and Isabella crossed the room in 3 quick steps, burying her face against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her emotion. "I'm so sorry." Oliver stood watching this reunion with a complicated expression, tenderness mingled with lingering hurt, compassion threaded through with uncertainty. When Isabella and Frank finally separated, we all settled into my living room, forming an awkward family circle that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. "We spent most of the night talking," Oliver began, his exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Really talking. I think for the first time?" Isabella nodded, her gaze steady despite her reddened eyes. "No more pretending. No more performance. It was difficult, but necessary. We've made some decisions," Oliver continued, reaching for Isabella's hand in a gesture that surprised me with its naturalness. "First, about the wedding gift." He turned to me, his expression earnest. "Mom, we can't accept the brownstone or the Golden Care shares. Not now, at least." My eyebrows rose involuntarily. "May I ask why?" Isabella answered, her voice stronger than I expected. "Because we need to build something of our own, on our own terms. If we're going to salvage this marriage and we need to start with a clean slate, not with millions of dollars that might paper over the cracks instead of helping us repair them." I studied them both, noting the subtle ways they leaned toward each other, how their fingers remained intertwined despite the tension of the conversation. "I understand," I said finally. "The gift will be there when you're ready for it." "Thank you," Oliver said, relief evident in his shoulders. "The second decision is about our living situation. We've canceled the honeymoon to Italy. We're going to Philadelphia instead," Isabella continued, turning to her father. "I want to show Oliver where I come from, my old neighborhood, the schools I attended, the community center where I spent my afternoons while you worked double shifts. All of it." Her voice softened. "No more hiding. Dad, no more shame." Frank's weathered face crumpled with emotion. "You know that old apartment isn't much to look at, Isabel. It's where I grew up," she said simply. "It's part of who I really am, and I want Oliver to know all of me, not just the polished version I created." Oliver squeezed her hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about the night of conversation they must have had. Whatever anger he'd felt at the altar had evolved into something more complex, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps understanding. "There's something else," Isabella said, turning to face me directly. Her chin lifted in a gesture that reminded me suddenly, powerfully, of Frank. "I want to apologize to you properly, Laura, not just with words, but with actions." "Go on," I said, neither accepting nor rejecting yet. The way I treated you at the wedding was inexcusable, introducing you as the housekeeper, seating you at the back table, all of it. She maintained eye contact, refusing the easier path of looking away. In my desperation to impress people who didn't matter, I hurt someone who does. Someone who matters to Oliver, and now to me? Yes, you did, I agreed, not sugarcoating the truth. I've never had to face the consequences of my actions before, she admitted. I've always been able to charm my way out of difficult situations or simply disappear and reinvent myself somewhere new. But I can't do that this time. And I don't want to. I want to make amends. Properly. What did you have in mind? I asked, curious rather than confrontational. Isabella straightened her shoulders. I'd like to volunteer at one of your Golden Care facilities. Not as the CEO's daughter-in-law or some society lady doing charity work, but as an ordinary helper. I want to learn what you've built, and I want to experience what it means to serve others with dignity, the way you did as a nurse. The request surprised me. It wasn't what I'd expected an apology gift, perhaps, or promises to be better in the future. This was something more substantive, a genuine attempt to understand the values I held dear. That's not an easy job, I said carefully. Physically or emotionally. I know. Her gaze remained steady. That's why I want to do it. I've spent years focused entirely on climbing higher, on impressing the right people. I want to learn what it means to care for people who can't do anything for me in return. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none, just exhaustion, humility, and a glimmer of something that might have been hope. All right, I agreed finally. I'll speak with the director at our Brookline facility. You can start next week, after your trip to Philadelphia. Thank you, she said simply, with none of the practiced charm I'd come to associate with her. Frank watched our exchange with quiet pride, his earlier hurt giving way to cautious optimism. Whatever mistakes Isabella had made, she was taking responsibility for them in a way that suggested genuine growth rather than mere damage control. Oliver, who had been quietly supportive throughout, spoke again. There's one more thing we wanted to discuss, he turned to Frank. Mr. Collins, we'd like to invite you to stay in Boston for a while after we return from Philadelphia, to get to know each other properly, as family. Frank's face brightened with hope. You mean that? We do, Isabella confirmed. We found a small 2-bedroom apartment to rent while we figure things out. The second bedroom is yours, if you want it. What about your job in Philadelphia? I asked Frank. He shrugged slightly. Factory's been cutting shifts anyway, and I've got enough saved for a while. He looked at his daughter with wonder. You really want me around, Izzy? I do. Dad? Her voice thickened with emotion. I spent so long running from where I came from. I don't want to run anymore. The four of us sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of the changes being proposed. Then Oliver stood, pulling Isabella gently to her feet beside him. We should go, he said. We have a lot to arrange before leaving for Philadelphia tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, I retrieved a small box from my study, the sapphire earrings I'd intended to give Isabella as a personal wedding gift, separate from the property and shares. Isabella, I said, offering her the box. These belong to my grandmother. I'd like you to have them, not because you're marrying into wealth, but because I see in you the same determination and resilience that she had. She opened the box, her eyes widening at the antique sapphires nestled against dark velvet. They're beautiful, she whispered. But I don't deserve... It's not about deserving, I interrupted gently. It's about belonging. Whatever happened yesterday. You're family now. These are part of your history too. Going forward. Isabella carefully closed the box, clutching it like something precious. Thank you, she said, the simple words carrying the weight of a more elaborate promise. As Oliver and Isabella left, Frank and I stood on the porch watching them drive away two people who had become unexpected allies in the aftermath of deception and revelation. Do you think they'll make it? Frank asked, echoing my own earlier thoughts. I do, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. They've seen the worst of each other now. There's nowhere to go but forward. Frank nodded, relief evident in the easing of his shoulders. I never thought I'd say this, but yesterday might have been the best thing that could have happened to Izzy. Painful, but necessary. For all of us, I agreed. Sometimes the most valuable gifts come wrapped in the most difficult packages. As Frank prepared to return to his hotel, I made a decision. Why don't you stay here until they get back from Philadelphia? The guest room is much more comfortable than that hotel, and it would give us a chance to get to know each other better. Frank hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of imposing. We're family now, I reminded him. Unexpected family, perhaps, but family nonetheless. His weathered face broke into a grateful smile. Thank you, Laura. I'd like that. As he carried his small overnight bag to the guest room, I found myself thinking about the strange, unpredictable nature of family, how it could expand in the most unexpected ways, through circumstances no one could have predicted. 24 hours earlier, I couldn't have imagined sharing my home with a factory worker from Philadelphia. Yet here we were, connected by our children's complicated journey toward authentic love. The wedding hadn't gone according to plan, far from it, but perhaps the messy reality was more valuable than the perfect illusion could ever have been. 2 weeks after the wedding, Oliver and Isabella returned from Philadelphia, transformed. The experience had clearly been significant for them both, Isabella more grounded and authentic than I'd ever seen her. Oliver with a new understanding of the woman he'd married. They arrived for Sunday dinner with Frank, who had extended his stay in Boston and was considering a permanent move. Isabella had already begun her volunteer work at the Brookline facility 3 days a week, coming home with stories of the residents that revealed a growing appreciation for the value of human connection beyond social climbing. As we gathered around my dining table, the same one where Oliver and I had shared thousands of meals over the years, I noticed a new ease between them. They moved around each other with the comfortable synchronicity of people who had begun to truly know one another. "How is Philadelphia?" I asked as we passed dishes of roast chicken and vegetables. "Illuminating," Oliver replied, glancing at Isabella with newfound respect. Izzy showed me everything: her old neighborhood, her schools, the library where she studied until closing time every night. I noticed his use of her childhood nickname, a small but significant acknowledgement of her true identity. "The apartment was exactly as I left it," Isabella told her father. "Even my science fair trophies still on the shelf." "Never had the heart to move them," Frank admitted. "Always hoped you might come back someday." Isabella reached for his hand across the table. "I'm sorry it took so long, Dad." As dinner progressed, Isabella shared stories from her childhood, honest, unvarnished accounts of growing up with limited resources but abundant determination. She described the community center where she'd spent afternoons while Frank worked overtime shifts, the teacher who'd recognized her potential and helped her apply for scholarships, the first time she'd realized that her address made people treat her differently. "I was 14, she recalled, carefully rearranging the peas on her plate. Applying for a summer science program at Penn. The interviewer's whole demeanor changed when he saw my address on the application. Suddenly I wasn't a promising student anymore. I was a charity case, a diversity statistic." "Is that when it started?" Oliver asked gently. "The desire to reinvent yourself?" Isabella nodded. "It was the first time I understood that where you come from can determine how people see you, regardless of your abilities or character." She looked down at her plate. "By college, I'd started making small changes, neutralizing my accent, referencing places I'd never actually been, letting people assume things about my background without correcting them. And then it snowballed," Frank surmised. "Yes," she acknowledged. Each small deception made the next one easier, until Isabella Green was born and Izzy Collins just disappeared. "Except she didn't," Oliver said, covering her hand with his. "She was there all along, the intelligence, the determination, the drive. Those were real, even if the backstory wasn't." Isabella looked at him gratefully. "It took losing everything to realize that." After dinner, as Frank and Oliver cleared the dishes, Isabella drew me aside into the living room. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, "for giving us the chance to start over. You could have exposed me from the beginning, or turned Oliver against me after the wedding. You had every right to." "That wouldn't have served anyone," I replied. "Least of all Oliver." "Still," she insisted, Most mothers would have fought harder against a daughter-in-law who treated them the way I treated you. I considered this. Perhaps, but I recognized something in you. Isabella, a hunger I understood from my own early days. The difference is, I channeled that hunger into building something meaningful, while you channeled it into constructing an illusion. She nodded, accepting the gentle criticism. I'm learning. The residents at Brookline are teaching me more than I expected. They don't care what designer I'm wearing or who my parents are. They just want someone to listen to their stories, to treat them with dignity. That's the foundation of Golden Care, I told her. Seeing people for who they are, not what they own or where they come from. It's a better foundation than the one I was building on, she admitted. As Oliver and Frank rejoined us, bringing coffee and dessert, the conversation shifted to their plans going forward. We found a small apartment in Cambridge, Oliver explained. Nothing fancy, but it's ours. We're starting fresh, building from the ground up. And work, I asked. Isabella, will you be returning to North Star? She shook her head. No, after everything that happened at the wedding, it would be too complicated. Too many people know the truth now. She straightened her shoulders. Besides, I'm ready for something different. I've applied for a position with a non-profit that helps disadvantaged students access higher education. My interview is next week. Using your PR skills for a different kind of cause, I observed. Exactly. It's time I used my abilities to help people like the girl I once was, instead of just climbing higher myself. Frank beamed with pride. That sounds wonderful. Isabel? And you, Dad? She asked. Have you decided about moving to Boston? Frank glanced at me, then back to his daughter. Actually, I've been talking with Laura about that. She's offered me a position at Golden Care Facilities maintenance supervisor. Turns out my factory experience is pretty transferable to keeping the physical plants running smoothly. Isabella's eyes widened. You're going to work for Golden Care? If that's all right with you, Frank said, suddenly uncertain. I know it might seem strange, with you volunteering there and all. It's perfect, Isabella assured him. More than perfect. I watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. When I'd offered Frank the position, it hadn't been charity or manipulation. He genuinely had skills that would benefit the organization. But the added benefit of helping him relocate closer to his daughter was undeniable. There's something else we wanted to discuss, Oliver said, taking Isabella's hand. About the wedding gift, I raised an eyebrow. The brownstone and shares I told you. They'll be there when you're ready. We've been thinking about that, Isabella said. We still don't want to accept them for ourselves, at least not yet. But we had another idea, Oliver continued. We'd like to use the value of the brownstone to establish a scholarship foundation for students from backgrounds like Isabella's kids with the ability and drive, but not the resources or connections to access elite universities. The Isabella Collins Foundation, Isabella added, deliberately using her birth name. A way of acknowledging where I came from while helping others who are still there. I sat back, genuinely impressed by the proposal. And the Golden Care shares, those we'd like to hold in trust, Oliver explained. Not accessing them now, but preserving them for the future, perhaps for our children someday. Or for the foundation, if it needs additional funding. The thoughtfulness of their plan moved me. This wasn't a rejection of my gift, but a transformation of it into something that aligned with their evolving values. I think it's an excellent idea, I said sincerely. A way of turning yesterday's deceptions into tomorrow's opportunities. Frank, who had been listening quietly, cleared his throat. I'd like to contribute too, he said. It's not much compared to a brownstone, but I've got some savings, enough to maybe fund one scholarship. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Dad, you don't have to. I want to, he interrupted gently. I couldn't give you much growing up, but I can help you do this now. The four of us sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the bonds between us strengthening despite or perhaps because of the tumultuous journey that had brought us together. As the evening drew to a close, Oliver pulled me aside while Isabella and Frank continued talking in the living room. Thank you, Mom, he said softly, for everything, for not giving up on us, even when things got messy. I'll never give up on you, I promised. Or on Isabella. You're both finding your way. and I'm proud of how you're doing it." Oliver glanced toward his wife, his expression softening. "She's not who I thought I was marrying," he admitted. "She's more complex, more flawed, and ultimately more interesting. I'm actually getting to know her now, the real her." "And do you like what you're discovering?" I asked. His smile was answer enough. "I do. The real Isabella is worth knowing, scars, struggles, and all." As they prepared to leave, Isabella embraced me, not the air kiss of our early encounters, but a genuine hug. "Thank you for the second chance," she whispered. "I won't waste it." "I know you won't," I replied, and I meant it, watching them drive away, my son and his wife. Beginning their authentic journey together, I felt a deep sense of peace. The wedding might have been a disaster by conventional standards, but it had accomplished something far more valuable than any perfect ceremony could have. It had stripped away pretense and created space for truth. Frank stood beside me on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the street. "They're going to be all right," he said. Not a question, but a realization. "Yes," I agreed. "I believe they are." 1 month after the wedding, the ripple effects of what Boston society had taken to calling the Green Collins affair were still being felt throughout the city's social circles. The story had spread, growing more elaborate with each retelling, some versions claiming Isabella had hired not just fake parents, but an entire fictional extended family. Others suggesting Oliver had known the truth all along and staged the revelation as some sort of social experiment. Eleanor called me regularly with updates on the gossip, which I received with amused detachment. The reality was far more mundane and ultimately more meaningful than the dramatic narratives being constructed. Oliver had returned to his pediatric practice. Isabella was thriving in her new role at the education nonprofit, and Frank had seamlessly integrated into the Golden Care maintenance team, his practical experience proving invaluable. The four of us had dinner together every Sunday, forming new traditions and building genuine connections. The Isabella Collins Foundation was moving forward, with legal frameworks being established and an advisory board taking shape. I had connected Isabella with several of my business contacts who had similar backgrounds to hers, successful professionals who had risen from humble beginnings and understood the value of creating pathways for others. 6 weeks after the wedding, we received an unexpected invitation to a charity gala hosted by the Blackwells, one of Boston's most prominent families, and among the guests who had witnessed the wedding drama firsthand. "We don't have to go," Oliver said when the invitation arrived. "It might be uncomfortable." Isabella shook her head. "No, I think we should. I'm not hiding anymore, not who I am, not where I came from." The night of the gala, I waited in my living room for Oliver and Isabella to pick me up. Frank had opted not to attend, feeling that such high society events were still beyond his comfort zone, despite our assurances. When they arrived, I was struck by the transformation in Isabella. Gone was the over-polished socialite with designer labels and calculated charm. In her place stood a woman in a simple but elegant black dress, minimal jewelry including my grandmother's sapphire earrings, and a quiet confidence that needed no external validation. "You look beautiful," I told her sincerely. "Thank you," she replied. I realized I don't need to try so hard anymore. It's exhausting maintaining a facade. Oliver watched her with obvious pride, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, a gesture of support rather than possession. When we arrived at the Blackwell mansion, the usual buzz of conversation momentarily stuttered as heads turned to observe our entrance. I could almost hear the collective thought, the Jacksons and Isabella Collins, the real-life soap opera in the flesh. Mrs. Blackwell approached immediately, her social mask firmly in place. "Laura, Oliver, Isabella, how wonderful that you could join us." Her eyes lingered on Isabella with barely disguised curiosity. "We weren't sure you'd come." "We wouldn't miss it," Isabella replied with simple dignity. "The Children's Education Fund does important work." Mrs. Blackwell seemed momentarily thrown by Isabella's straightforward response, perhaps expecting defensiveness or excessive charm to compensate for her previous deceptions. "Yes, well," she recovered. "Do enjoy yourselves. There are many people eager to speak with you." As she moved away, Isabella took a deep breath. "That wasn't so bad." "The night is young," Oliver quipped, but squeezed her hand reassuringly. Throughout the evening, we navigated the social currents with calm determination. Some guests avoided us entirely. Others approached with thinly veiled curiosity disguised as concern. "Isabella, darling," cooed a woman who had been at the wedding. "How are you holding up? Such a difficult time you must be having." "Actually, I'm doing quite well," Isabella replied evenly. "Sometimes it takes a public reckoning to find your authentic path." The woman blinked, clearly expecting either defensiveness or apology rather than calm self-awareness. As we moved through the crowded ballroom, I noticed a pattern emerging. The guests who approached Isabella with genuine warmth were often those who, like her, had risen from modest beginnings. They recognized in her story elements of their own journeys, the compromises made, the identities adjusted, the constant pressure to fit into spaces not designed for people like them. "I changed my accent, too," confided a prominent surgeon in a quiet moment. "Took elocution lessons to erase Dorchester from my voice." "We all reinvent ourselves to some degree," Isabella nodded, understanding passing between them. "The difference is, I took it too far, created a fiction instead of an evolution." Later in the evening, Mrs. Blackwell approached Isabella again, this time with her daughter Amelia in tow. "Isabella," Mrs. Blackwell said with manufactured brightness, "Amelia is considering applying to Penn State for her graduate studies. Perhaps you could tell her about your experience there." The question was clearly designed to force Isabella to either continue her deceptions or admit to them publicly again. I felt Oliver stiffen beside me, preparing to intervene, but Isabella surprised us all. "I'd be happy to," she said calmly. "I transferred to Penn State from Philadelphia Community College after my second year. It was challenging coming in as a transfer student from a less prestigious institution, but the education was excellent." Amelia, who appeared genuinely interested rather than malicious, asked follow-up questions about specific programs and professors. Isabella answered thoughtfully, neither hiding nor overemphasizing her non-traditional path. Mrs. Blackwell denied the drama she'd clearly hoped to provoke, eventually guided her daughter away with a stiff smile. "Well handled," I murmured to Isabella. She shrugged slightly. "I'm not ashamed of my path anymore. It was harder than most, which makes me more proud of where I've ended up." As the evening progressed, Isabella was approached by the director of the Children's Education Fund, who had overheard her conversation with Amelia. "Mrs. Jackson," the woman said, using Isabella's married name. "I couldn't help overhearing your discussion about educational pathways. We're looking for board members who understand the challenges faced by students from diverse backgrounds. Would you perhaps be interested in learning more about the possibility?" Isabella's eyes widened slightly. "I would, yes, very much so." "Wonderful. The experience you mentioned, community college to an elite university, that's exactly the kind of transition many of our students are attempting to navigate." As they exchanged contact information, I saw something shift in Isabella's expression, the realization that her complicated background, which she had worked so hard to hide, might actually be an asset in creating meaningful change. By the end of the evening, something unexpected had occurred. Isabella, rather than being socially ostracized as many might have predicted, had found her authentic voice. Those who had approached her with curiosity or judgment had largely come away impressed by her candor and resilience. Those who had avoided her altogether revealed more about their own insecurities than hers. As we prepared to leave, Mrs. Blackwell intercepted us one final time. "Isabella," she said, her voice lowered confidentially, "I must say, you've handled this evening with remarkable composure. Many in your position would have declined to appear in public so soon after such revelations." Isabella met her gaze steadily. "The only thing worse than making mistakes is hiding from them. Mrs. Blackwell, I spent too many years hiding already." Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or even grudging respect. She nodded curtly and moved away to bid other guests goodbye. In the car heading home, Oliver reached for Isabella's hand. "You were amazing tonight." "It wasn't as difficult as I expected," she admitted. "Once you stop caring so desperately what everyone thinks of you, it's actually quite liberating." I smiled from the back seat, remembering my own journey to that same realization decades earlier. The people whose opinions truly matter will value authenticity over performance every time. I'm beginning to understand that, Isabella said, glancing back at me with genuine warmth. Better late than never. When we arrived at my home, Oliver insisted on walking me to the door, despite my protest that it wasn't necessary. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, embracing me on the porch. "Having you there made it easier for both of us." "You didn't need me," I told him honestly. "You and Isabella handled everything beautifully on your own," he smiled, the moonlight catching the same determined expression I'd seen countless times throughout his childhood when he was learning to ride a bike, studying for difficult exams, applying to medical school. "Maybe, but it's always good to have backup." As I watched them drive away, I reflected on the evening's unspoken lesson that true strength comes not from constructing perfect facades or navigating social hierarchies, but from the courage to stand firmly in one's truth, however complicated or imperfect that truth might be. 3 months after the wedding, Oliver and Isabella invited us to a small gathering at their Cambridge apartment. The modest 2-bedroom space was simply but warmly furnished. Photos of both families displayed prominently, including several of Frank and Isabella from her childhood, no longer hidden away in shame. "We have an announcement," Oliver said once we were all settled in their living room. For a brief, startled moment, I wondered if a grandchild might be on the way. But Isabella's next words took a different direction. "We'd like to renew our vows," she said, looking first at her father, then at me. "Not a big production like the wedding, but something small and genuine. Just family and a few close friends." "A fresh start," Oliver added. "Based on truth this time." "We were hoping," Isabella continued, "that both of you would play special roles. Dad, I'd like you to walk me down the aisle for real this time." Frank's eyes glistened. "I'd be honored." "And Laura," Isabella turned to me, "we'd like you to officiate, if you're willing. You've been such an important part of our journey, helping us find our way back to authenticity." I was touched beyond words. "Of course, I'd be honored." The ceremony took place 2 weeks later in the garden behind my home, where James had once planted roses and apple trees. October in New England painted the backdrop with brilliant autumn colors, the air crisp and clear as 30 of our closest friends and family gathered on white folding chairs. Isabella wore a simple cream dress, elegant but understated. Worlds away from the elaborate designer gown of her first wedding, her hair was styled naturally, her makeup minimal, her only jewelry my grandmother's sapphire earrings and her wedding band. Frank, in a new suit that fit him properly, walked her down the makeshift aisle with pride shining in his eyes. Gone was the uncertainty and discomfort of the first wedding. In its place, the natural dignity of a father openly cherished by his daughter. Oliver waited beneath an arch of autumn flowers, his expression one of absolute certainty, so different from the tension and doubt that had marked our private conversation the night before his first wedding. As they stood before me, I looked out at the small gathering, Eleanor and her husband, James Chen and his family, Harry Winters, several of Oliver's colleagues, Isabella's new co-workers from the education nonprofit. Marie Collins sat in the front row, finally able to openly claim her niece. No hired actors, no social climbers, no audience to impress, just people who genuinely cared about the couple standing before me. "We gather today," I began, "not to create a marriage, but to celebrate one that has already weathered its first storm. Oliver and Isabella have chosen to renew their commitment to each other, not in the glow of perfect illusion, but in the warm light of authentic understanding." As I spoke about this nature of true partnership built on honesty, mutual respect, and the courage to be vulnerable, I saw the words landing differently than they might have 3 months earlier. Oliver and Isabella had earned these insights through difficult experience, not just received them as traditional wedding platitudes. When the time came for them to share their new vows, Isabella spoke first. "Oliver," she said, her voice clear and steady, "3 months ago, I married you as someone I wasn't. Today, I stand before you as myself, Isabella Collins Jackson, with all my complexities, flaws, and truths. I promise to never again hide behind masks or fabrications. I promise to share my whole self with you, the parts I'm proud of and the parts I'm still learning to accept." She took a breath. emotion momentarily overwhelming her. Thank you for seeing beyond my deceptions to the person I could become, for giving me the chance to rebuild our foundation on truth. I love you not for what you can give me or who you can help me become, but simply for who you are. Oliver's eyes shone as he took his turn. Isabella, when we first married, I thought I knew who you were. I was wrong, and I'm grateful for that mistake, because the woman I've discovered since then is far more remarkable than the one I thought I was getting. Gentle laughter rippled through the gathering. I, too, kept parts of myself hidden, he continued, afraid that my family's success might overshadow who I was as an individual. I promised to bring my whole self to our marriage as well. No more strategic omissions, no more protective barriers. He took her hands in his. I love you not despite your complicated journey, but because of it. The strength it took to transform your life not once but twice shows me exactly who you are at your core. And that's the person I choose, today and every day forward. As they exchanged rings again, the same bands, but with new meaning, I felt a sense of rightness that had been absent at the Ritz-Carlton. This was no performance for society's approval, but a genuine commitment between two people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to build something better together. By the power vested in me, I concluded, I affirm the marriage of Oliver and Isabella Jackson. What began in complexity has found its way to clarity. What started with masks has discovered the freedom of authenticity. As they kissed, sealing their renewed commitment, the small gathering erupted in applause, not the polite, measured applause of social obligation, but the genuine emotional response of people who understood the journey this couple had undertaken. 1 year after the wedding, I sat in my garden, enjoying the spring sunshine and reflecting on the remarkable transformations that had unfolded since that chaotic day at the Ritz-Carlton. Oliver and Isabella had settled into a rhythm of genuine partnership, their relationship deepening through honesty rather than performance. They had recently purchased a modest but charming home in Brookline, using their own savings rather than my gift. The brownstone remained dedicated to the Isabella Collins Foundation, which had awarded its first round of scholarships to 15 promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. Frank had fully embraced his new life in Boston, his maintenance role at Golden Care expanding to include mentorship of younger staff members. He'd moved from my guest room to his own apartment near Oliver and Isabella, though he still joined us for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. Isabella's work with the education nonprofit had blossomed into a leadership position, her authentic background becoming her greatest asset rather than a source of shame. She spoke regularly at schools in disadvantaged neighborhoods, sharing her journey from South Philadelphia to Boston's professional world, emphasizing the importance of education without erasing one's origins. Oliver had been promoted to head of pediatric oncology at his hospital, his natural compassion and leadership finally unrestricted by the fear of being seen as privileged or entitled. He and Isabella were discussing starting a family, approaching the prospect with thoughtfulness and mutual support. As for me, I had begun the process of transitioning Golden Care's day-to-day operations to a talented executive team, allowing myself more time for personal pursuits. Frank and I had developed an unexpected friendship, occasionally attending theater performances or symphony concerts together, not romantically, but as companions who understood each other's experiences as single parents who had sacrificed for their children. The phone rang, interrupting my reverie. It was Isabella. "Laura," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Can you meet us for dinner tonight? We have news." At the restaurant, a casual neighborhood place, rather than the upscale establishments Isabella once favored, Oliver and Isabella waited with barely contained excitement. Frank arrived shortly after me, completing our small family circle. "We have something to share," Oliver began, taking Isabella's hand. Isabella's face glowed with happiness. "We're expecting, due in November." Joy swept through me, the prospect of becoming a grandmother, both thrilling and somewhat surreal. Frank's eyes immediately filled with tears. "A grandchild," he whispered. "I never thought—" Isabella reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "You're going to be an amazing grandfather. Dad." As we celebrated with toasts of sparkling cider, Isabella abstaining from wine, I couldn't help but marvel at how different this family gathering felt from our first awkward meetings. The pretense and performance had been stripped away, replaced by genuine connection and shared joy. Later, as we were finishing dessert, Isabella grew more serious. "There's something else we wanted to discuss with both of you," Oliver nodded. "We've been thinking about the brownstone and the golden care shares." My heart sank slightly. I had truly come to believe in the Foundation's mission and didn't want to see its funding diverted. "We want to make it official," Isabella continued. "Transfer full ownership of the brownstone to the Foundation permanently. And as for the golden care shares, we'd like them placed in a trust," Oliver explained. 30% split 3 ways, 10% each for the Foundation, for our child, and for both of you to administer as you see fit. I was touched by their thoughtfulness. "That's a generous arrangement. It feels right," Isabella said simply. "Building something that honors where we've been and creates opportunity for the future." As we left the restaurant, walking together through the mild spring evening, I reflected on the journey we had all taken over the past year. What had begun as deception and performance had transformed into authenticity and purpose. The painful revelations of the wedding had ultimately created space for something far more valuable than social standing or appearances, genuine connection based on truth rather than facade. Frank fell into step beside me as Oliver and Isabella walked ahead, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "I never imagined this," Frank said quietly. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost my daughter forever. Now I have her back, plus a son-in-law, a grandbaby on the way, and—" He glanced at me with a gentle smile. "A friend I never expected to find." "Life rarely follows the path we anticipate," I replied. "Sometimes it leads us through difficult terrain before bringing us exactly where we need to be." As we reached our cars, Isabella embraced me one final time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing beyond my mistakes to the person I could become." "That's what mothers do," I told her. "Even unexpected ones." Driving home alone, I thought about the lessons we had all learned through this complicated journey. Isabella had discovered that her worth wasn't determined by her origins or social standing, but by her authentic character and contributions. Oliver had learned that honesty, however uncomfortable, created stronger foundations than comfortable fictions. Frank had found that love transcended mistakes and deceptions, creating space for reconciliation and new beginnings. And I had been reminded that family isn't always formed in the ways we expect. Sometimes it emerges from chaos and challenge, stronger for having weathered the storm together. In my mind, I addressed James, as I often did in quiet moments. "You would like her, my love. Not the woman she pretended to be, but the one she's becoming. She has your determination, your resilience. And Oliver is happy, truly happy, not just performing happiness for others' approval." As I pulled into my driveway, I smiled at the thought of the grandchild to come, a new generation that would benefit from all the hard-won wisdom of our collective journey. They would grow up knowing both their heritage from Frank's factory work to my nursing career, from Isabella's difficult climb to Oliver's compassionate service without shame or pretense. The wedding that had seemed like a disaster had actually been a beginning, messy and painful, but ultimately transformative. Sometimes the most valuable gifts truly do come wrapped in the most difficult packages. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And if you enjoyed this story, check out 2 other channel favorites. My daughter-in-law banned me from my granddaughter's life until she needed my money, and I discovered my husband's secret family after 30 years of marriage. Ta